Wren Calloway was 20 years old when Denton Farr laughed at her across a banker's desk in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and she made herself a promise she would never speak out loud. The kind of promise you carry in your chest for 25 years. The kind that changes everything that comes after. March of 1987. The Meridian Agribank building on 4th Street smelled like carpet cleaner and recycled air. Wren had driven 90 minutes from Boise City in a truck with a cracked dashboard and a heater that worked only when it felt like it. She wore her mother's denim jacket because it was the cleanest thing she owned, and because putting it on that morning had felt like asking for help from someone who was no longer there to give it. Vera Calloway had been dead for 11 days. Wren sat across from Denton Farr in a chair that was too soft for the kind of conversation she needed to have. Farr was 52, thick through the shoulders, silver hair combed flat. A man who had spent 3 decades deciding which families in western Oklahoma got to keep farming and which ones did not. He wore a watch that cost more than Wren's truck. He had a framed photo of a boat on his desk and no photos of people. He looked at Wren the way men like him looked at girls like her, like she was a problem that had already solved itself. She pushed the folder across the desk. Property deed tax records, 2 seasons of yield data her mother had kept in a green ledger book. 280 acres in Cimarron County. Her mother's land. Her land now. Farr opened the folder, spent 30 seconds looking at it, then closed it again. "Your mother had good intentions," he said. His voice had the practiced warmth of a man who said difficult things 50 times a year and had learned to make them sound like favors. But that property has not turned a real profit in 4 years. The soil tests we have on file show organic matter below 1%. You are looking at dryland acreage in a part of the panhandle that gets 15 inches of rain in a good year. This land is not producing. It has not been producing. Wren kept her hands flat on her thighs. She had practiced keeping them still. "I am not here to borrow money," she said. "I am here to ask about my options." Farr smiled. "Your options are straightforward. You can try to operate that land yourself, which, given your age and experience level, is not something I would recommend. You can lease it to an established operator. Crawford Isles has been expanding eastward and would probably give you fair terms. Or you can sell, take the equity, and start your life somewhere that makes more sense for a young woman." He said young woman the way people say it when they mean child. Wren looked at him for a long moment. She thought about her mother, about the last morning, Vera sitting at the kitchen table with her hands around a coffee cup, not drinking it, just holding the warmth. About the way her mother had looked out the window at the south field for a long time, without speaking. About how Wren had been in a hurry to get back to Stillwater, back to her classes and her apartment, and the life she had been building 300 miles away. About how she had kissed her mother on the cheek and said she would call that weekend. Vera Calloway died 4 days later. $61 in her checking account, a tractor that needed a new fuel pump, and 280 acres that every banker and neighbor and county extension agent in Cimarron County had been telling her for 16 years were not worth the effort she was putting into them. Wren picked up her folder. "Thank you for your time," she said. Farr leaned back, generous with his pity. "Think it through," he said. "The offer from Isles will not stay open forever. Land like that has a short window before it becomes more liability than asset. You are 20 years old. You have your whole life ahead of you. Do not let sentiment tie you to something that cannot carry you." Wren walked out into the March wind and sat in her truck for a long time with both hands on the steering wheel. She did not cry. She had been crying for 11 days, and she was done with it. She started the truck and drove back to Boise City, 280 acres of dry Oklahoma dirt. and no one left to tell her what to do with it. That was the full inventory of what Vera Calloway had left behind. That and the cracked house with the window in the kitchen that let in cold air no matter how many times you resealed it, and the tractor that needed work, and $61 that Wren had already spent on the funeral flowers because there was nothing else to spend it on. She arrived back at the farm near dark, sat in the driveway for a minute looking at the house, looking at the fields stretching out flat and brown in every direction, under a sky the color of old pewter. The Panhandle in March had no patience for sentiment. Wind moved across the land in long, slow waves bending the sparse grass, finding every gap in every structure. Wren got out of the truck and walked the south field until she could not see the house anymore. The soil under her boots was dry and pale. She crouched down, picked up a handful, let it fall through her fingers. Her mother had walked this same ground every evening for 16 years, looking at things Wren had never thought to look at, counting things Wren had never thought to count. She stood up, looked west into the last of the light, and said out loud, "To no one, I am not selling." The locked door had been there her whole life. The small storage shed behind the cattle pen, built from salvaged lumber the year Wren turned 4. Her mother had kept it padlocked as long as Wren could remember. When Wren was 8, she had asked why. Vera had said it was full of chemicals and sharp equipment not for children. When Wren was 16, she had asked again. Vera had said the same thing, adding that there was nothing in there Wren needed to worry about. Wren had believed her because daughters believed their mothers, and because there were always other things to worry about on a farm, and because some doors stay closed simply because you never find the right moment to open them. She found the key on her 4th day back. She had been cleaning out the workshop, organizing her mother's tools, trying to understand the full scope of what she had inherited. And she found it tucked into a small tin that had once held throat lozenges, sitting on the shelf behind 3 cans of wood stain and a jar of nails. A single brass key on a loop of wire, small and ordinary, the kind that could have opened anything. She knew immediately what it opened. The shed door was warped from years of temperature swings. Wren had to put her shoulder into it twice before it gave hinges screaming rust and protest. The smell that came out was dense and specific. Old wood machine oil, something dry and papery underneath. She found the light. A bare bulb on a pull string casting yellow light across a space that was smaller than she remembered from childhood. Along the left wall, tarps over shapes she did not recognize. Along the back wall, shelves with labeled mason jars of seeds, all dated in her mother's handwriting. And in the far right corner, half hidden behind a stack of wooden crates, a military surplus box painted army green. Iron padlocked a combination dial on the front. Wren dragged it into the light. It was heavier than it looked. She tried combinations for 20 minutes. Her mother's birthday, nothing. Her own birthday, nothing. The year the farm was deeded, nothing. The year her parents married, nothing. She sat back on her heels and thought about her mother, about what Vera Calloway had loved most, had held closest, had returned to again and again in the years after Wren's father left, and the years after that, when it was just the two of them on 280 acres of dry Oklahoma ground. She thought about the south field, about the way her mother said its name, the way she said any name she loved quietly, like a private thing. She tried the date her mother had first planted that field, April 1971, 041971. The lock clicked open. Inside the box, wrapped in a square of oilcloth folded precisely at the corners, was a journal. Thick, the cover worn dark brown leather, soft from handling. No title, no name on the outside. Beside it, packed in careful rows, a collection of folded papers, envelopes, handwritten notes on index cards, pages torn from graph paper, covered in numbers. Wren counted quickly. More than 100 separate documents. She lifted the journal first, opened to the first page. Her mother's handwriting. Neat, precise, slightly forward-leaning, the handwriting of a woman who had learned penmanship from a teacher who cared about it. April 14th, 1971. South Field, first full season. Soil pull at 6 inches. Color 10YR4/3 texture. Sandy loam organic matter. Estimated below 1.2% by feel and drainage. No earthworm count possible. pH unknown. No test kit yet. Rainfall. March 1.8 inches. Plan rye cover after wheat harvest, turn under before next planting. This will cost 1 season of sorghum income. Worth it if the theory holds. Wren read it 3 times. She flipped ahead. Every page dated, every field mapped with hand-drawn diagrams, every season documented in precise columns. Rainfall, soil temperature estimates, crop yield by acre, cover crop species and seeding rates, observations about water retention after rain events, notes about insect populations, about which sections of the field dried out first, about the texture of the soil at different depths across different years. 16 years of records. 16 years of a woman alone on 280 acres, running an experiment that no one around her understood, and no one around her supported, documenting every result with the patience and precision of a scientist who had no laboratory, no funding, no colleagues, and no recognition. Just the land and a theory and enough stubbornness to keep going when every yield report said the short-term cost was not worth it. Near the back of the journal, tucked between 2 pages of data from 1985, Wren found an envelope, her name on the front, her mother's handwriting. The envelope had not been sealed, just folded shut. Wren sat down on the floor of the shed with the envelope in her hands for a long time before she opened it. Vera Calloway had written 4 pages in a hand slightly less controlled than her field notes. More personal, more urgent. She wrote about the land, about what she had found when she first took over the farm soil, so depleted from 30 years of the same rotation that earthworms had nearly disappeared from the top 12 inches. About the book she had found at a library sale in Liberal in 1970, published in 1923. A dryland farming manual written by a man who had spent his life working marginal land in Kansas and Colorado, and had documented what worked over 40 years of direct observation. About how she had read it 3 times and understood that the land was not broken. It was starving, and that feeding it required patience, measured in years, not seasons. She wrote about the costs, the years when the cover crops ate into income she did not have, the neighbors who drove past and shook their heads, the banker who told her twice that she was wasting money on seed that would never be sold, the extension agent who told her the county average yield targets assumed conventional inputs, and that she should not expect her numbers to reflect those targets. She wrote, "I have not been farming to compete with anyone. I have been farming to build something that will outlast me." She wrote about Wren, about watching her daughter grow up on land that looked worthless to everyone who did not know how to look at it, about the decision to send Wren to college to give her options beyond 280 acres of panhandle soil, about the fear that came with that decision. The fear that if Wren left and built a different life, there would be no one left who knew what the land was becoming. Near the end of the letter, she wrote, "This ground is not what it looks like from the road. It is not what Denton Farr thinks it is, or what Crawford Isles thinks it is, or what anyone who has never watched a field for 16 consecutive years could possibly know it is. I have been building something in this soil for 16 years, and it is not finished yet. It needs more time. 10 years, maybe 15, before it reaches what it can be." The last paragraph read, "If you are reading this, I did not get to tell you in person. I'm sorry for that. But I need you to know one thing above everything else. Do not sell. The ground remembers everything I put into it. You just have to give it time to show you." Wren folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, and sat in the storage shed until the light outside the door went from gray to dark. Then she went inside, made coffee she did not drink, and started reading the journal from page 1. Crawford Isles came on a Tuesday, which was how he operated. Weekdays, morning hours before you had time to think too carefully about what you were agreeing to. He was 54 years old, broad through the chest, a man whose family had farmed Cimarron County since before statehood. He wore a John Deere cap so broken in that the bill had permanently curved to the exact angle of his habitual squint. He farmed 1,100 acres to the east and north of the Callaway place, and he had been watching those 280 acres for 15 years with the patient interest of a man who knows a thing will eventually come to him if he waits long enough. Wren was in the driveway checking the tractor when he pulled up. She had been trying to understand the fuel pump problem for 2 hours and had gotten exactly nowhere. Isles got out, nodded at the tractor, nodded at her. Said he was sorry about Vera. Said her mother had been a good neighbor, even if she had some unconventional ideas about farming. Said it the way you say something unconventional when what you mean is wrong. Wren kept her hand on the fuel line connector. Isles got to the point the way men who do not need anything from you get to the point. $15 an acre, he said. 6-year lease renewable. $4,200 a year guaranteed regardless of weather or yield. You would not have to touch the equipment, would not have to manage inputs, would not have to worry about a single thing. He would handle it all. Wren looked at him. "What would you do with the cover crop rotations?" she asked. Isles paused. He had not expected the question. He adjusted his cap. "Those fields need to go back into production," he said. "Full production. Your mother was leaving income on the ground every year with that system of hers." Wren turned back to the fuel line. "I appreciate you coming by," she said. "I'm going to farm it myself." Isles looked at the tractor, looked at Wren, looked at the fields in a way that said he was calculating something. "You are 20 years old," he said. "You dropped out of college. You have got a broken tractor and land that has not hit county average yield in a decade." He paused, letting that settle. "Your mother was a hard worker. I will give her that. But she was farming against the land, not with it. You would be better off taking the money and building something real." Wren did not look up. "I will let you know if I change my mind," she said. Isles drove away. Wren kept working on the fuel pump until the light failed, then went inside and read more of her mother's journal by the kitchen light with a blanket over her shoulders, because the propane was running low and she was rationing it. She needed money, and she needed it before spring planting, which was coming whether she was ready or not. The hire sign at the Allsups in Boise City said nights and weekends. The manager, a man named Gary Puckett, who had the resigned energy of someone who had long ago accepted the full terms of his life, looked at Wren for 30 seconds when she came in and said she could start Thursday. She worked 11 to 7 5 nights a week at $4.20 an hour. Drove home at 7:15, slept 4 hours, worked the farm until 10, drove to town. She did this for 11 weeks without taking a day off. She bought seed at the co-op with her first paycheck and came back 2 weeks later for the inoculant for the legume mix. The woman behind the counter, older, who had been selling seed in Cimarron County since the 60s, watched Wren read the labels on the hairy vetch bags for a long time. "What are you putting that in with?" she asked. "Winter rye and crimson clover," Wren said. The woman looked at her. "What ground Callaway place west of town?" The woman was quiet for a moment. "Your mother's place. Vera's place." "Yes, ma'am." Another pause. Your mother used to buy that same mix, she said. Every fall, regular as anything. I always figured she knew something the rest of these boys did not. She rang up the seed without another word. When Wren went to pay, she found the hairy vetch had been discounted to the old price from 3 years ago. She looked at the woman. The woman looked at the register. That is just the price for that item, the woman said. Have a good season. Harmon Voss appeared on a Wednesday in late April, which surprised Wren because she had not told anyone she was planting, and because she had not known until that week that Harmon Voss existed. He drove a green pickup that had been repainted at least twice in its life and was currently a color that approximated the green of a pine tree in low light. He was 67 years old, weathered to the specific texture of a man who had spent 4 decades outside, and he carried a metal toolbox that was heavy enough to require both hands. He did not introduce himself immediately. He walked to the tractor, looked at it for a minute, set down his toolbox, opened it, and began working. Wren came out of the equipment shed with a wrench in her hand and found a stranger taking apart the fuel pump she had been fighting for 3 weeks. She stood at a distance and watched. He worked with the economy of motion that comes from having done something thousands of times. No wasted movement, no consulting of manuals. Just hands and the problem and the space between them closing. After 8 minutes, he had the pump apart, had identified a diaphragm failure that Wren had suspected but could not confirm with the tools she had, and had begun reassembling it with a replacement part he had brought in a small paper bag in his jacket pocket. "Who are you?" Wren said. "Harmon Voss. I fixed equipment for your mother for 9 years. He kept working. "She did not tell me about you," Wren said. He glanced up briefly. "She told me about you," he said. He went back to the pump. Wren stood there. She asked me to check on things, he said. After. Said she was not sure how long she had, and she wanted to make sure the equipment was not going to leave you stranded in the middle of something important. He tightened the last fitting, wiped his hands on a rag he pulled from his back pocket. "She showed me the journal," he said. "Some of it. The parts she wanted me to understand, so I could help you understand it." He picked up his toolbox. "You need to start the south field this week if you are going to follow her rotation." She had it timed to the soil temperature. "There are notes in the back section." Wren looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I have the journal. I have been reading it." Harmon nodded. "Good," he said. "Some of it will make more sense once you see the ground she is describing. I can walk it with you if you want." They walked the south field that afternoon. Harmon moved slowly, stopping every few yards, crouching to look at the soil, pointing to places where the texture changed, where a slight depression held moisture differently, where a line of darker color in the profile showed where previous cover crops had decomposed and added organic material back into the structure. He talked the way experienced people talk when they are not trying to impress anyone directly, without ornamentation, as if the information itself was the only thing that mattered. "Your mother figured out the drainage first," he said. "She spent 3 seasons just watching where the water went. Those 2 low spots on the east side, she stopped trying to fight them and started working with them. Put her legume strips there where the moisture stayed longer. That changed the whole east section." He stopped, picked up a handful of soil, held it up so Wren could see the color against the flat afternoon sky. 3 years ago, that would have been gray and light," he said. "Almost no structure. Now look at it." Wren looked at it. The soil in his hand was darker, more cohesive, held its shape slightly when he pressed it. "That is 16 years," he said. "Not one shortcut. Not one season where she did not hold the line." He let it fall. "Your mother was the most patient person I ever met," he said. "And I am 70 years old. and I have met a lot of people. Wren worked the south field the following week. She ran her mother's tractor fuel pump repaired across the rows her mother had laid out according to diagrams in the back section of the journal. Harmon came 3 mornings a week and worked beside her doing the things she did not know how to do yet, and showing her the things she would need to do alone. He never offered opinions about whether she should be doing this, never suggested the lease to Crawford Isles or the conversation with Denton Farr. He treated her decisions as already made, which was the greatest respect anyone showed her in that first year, and she did not forget it. The first frost came early that October. Wren had seeded the winter rye across 160 acres after the wheat came off. The crimson clover was establishing in the low sections. The hairy vetch had taken hold across the south border strips. She stood at the edge of the field in the October cold, watching the last light go flat and gray across the cover crop. The young plants just visible above the soil, a fine green haze across ground that looked to anyone driving past on the county road exactly like a field that was not being used for anything productive. Crawford Isles drove past that afternoon, slowed down, did not stop. Wren watched his brake lights disappear over the low rise to the east. The diner in Boise City had a booth near the back where the farming community of Cimarron County had been conducting its informal business for 30 years. Wren started hearing what people said about her in the spring of her second year. Not because anyone said it to her face, but because Boise City was a town of 3,000 people. And information moved the way water moves on flat ground around obstacles into every available space. They said she was going to fail by summer. They said she was planting cover crops on ground that needed cash crops, which everyone knew was financial suicide. They said Vera Calloway had been a good woman and a bad farmer, and the daughter was going to make the same mistakes. They said Crawford Isles was being patient, and he would get that ground before the year was out. Wren heard all of it and said nothing. She worked the night shift at the Allsups, drove home at sunrise, worked the farm until her body would not cooperate, then slept 4 hours and did it again. In the evenings, when the light was gone and the fields were invisible, and she had nothing left to give. The day she sat at the kitchen table with her mother's journal and a yellow legal pad and worked through the field notes section by section, making her own notes, tracking what she had done against what her mother had projected, looking for the patterns Vera had spent 16 years learning to see. The journal had a section in the back that Vera had titled simply Observations. It was different from the field data sections, less structured, more meditative. Vera wrote in that section the way she might have written in a private diary, not recording facts, but recording the process of understanding something. One entry from June of 1979 stopped Wren in the middle of a Tuesday night. I have been trying to explain to people why I do what I do, and I have stopped trying. Not because they are wrong to be skeptical. The numbers do not support me yet. Not on paper, not in yield reports, not in any way a banker or a neighbor can measure. I am losing money short-term by every conventional metric. I understand why they laugh, what I cannot explain to them because I do not yet have the language for it, and because the proof is still 12 years away, is that I am not farming a season. I am farming a generation. I am building something that will not show itself until after I am gone. Maybe that is a strange thing to spend your life on. Maybe they are right that it makes no practical sense. But when I walk this ground in the evening and feel how different it is, how much more alive it is than it was 8 years ago, I think about what it will be in another 8 years, and I am not afraid of being called foolish. I am only afraid I will not live to see it finished. Wren read that entry 4 times. She thought about her mother sitting at this same table writing those words in the same kitchen, under the same low light. with the same wind moving across the same flat, dark ground outside. She thought about the way Vera had looked out at the south field that last morning holding her coffee without drinking it. She had known, Wren thought. She had known she was running out of time, and what she had been looking at through that window was not a field. It was everything she had built, and everything she had not finished, and everything she was going to have to trust to someone else to complete. Wren closed the journal. She sat for a long time in the quiet kitchen. Then she opened the legal pad and kept writing. The first full year ended in November of 1988. Wren's wheat came in at 19 bushels per acre. The county average that season was 23. She was below average on yield, above her expenses by $600, and had cover crops establishing across 160 acres that would return no income until the following year. By every metric Denton Farr used, she was losing. By every metric Vera Calloway had documented in 16 years of field notes, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Harmon came by the day after she got her final yield report from the elevator. He sat at the kitchen table while Wren made coffee and did not say anything until she set a cup in front of him. "You are disappointed," he said. "It is not enough," Wren said. He turned his cup in his hands. "It is exactly enough," he said. "Your mother's second year on this rotation. She came in at 17. Third year, 21. She did not hit county average until year 5. He looked at Wren directly. "You came in at 19. You are ahead of where she was." Wren looked at her own cup. "You have to stop measuring what you are doing against this year," Harmon said. "Your mother made that mistake in the beginning. Drove herself half crazy, comparing single-season numbers to neighbors who were mining their soil every year." He paused. "You are not farming a season. You are farming something longer than that." Wren looked up at him. "She wrote that she said almost exactly that in the journal." Harmon nodded. "I know," he said. "She told me the same thing every time I thought she was making a mistake." He almost smiled. "Took me 3 years to believe her." Outside the kitchen window, the cover crop fields were brown and flat and gave no indication of what was happening underneath the surface. The rye was root-building, nitrogen-fixing, adding organic material to a soil profile that Vera Calloway had been rebuilding since before Wren learned to read. Crawford Isles drove past the farm at dusk, the way he did most evenings, looking at fields that still looked to him like a waste of usable ground. He would keep looking. He would keep waiting. He did not know what was coming. Wren Calloway was 21 years old, and she was patient in the way her mother had taught her, in the way the land itself had taught her mother, one season at a time, one year at a time, one careful and quiet and relentless decision to stay after another. The people who had bet against her were still betting. She was still working. The ground was still keeping everything she put into it. The years did not blur so much as they accumulated the way soil accumulates slowly, invisibly, each season adding something too small to see, but too real to deny. Wren stopped counting what she was losing and started counting what was building. By 1990, the earthworm population in the South Field had tripled. She knew because Harmon had shown her how to measure it, a simple count per cubic foot, the same method her mother had used and recorded in the journal every spring since 1973. Vera's first count in the South Field had been 4 per cubic foot. By 1983, she had reached 11. Wren's first count in 1988 had been 14. By 1990, it was 22. Numbers nobody in Cimarron County was measuring. Numbers that did not appear on any yield report or bank statement or county extension office summary. Numbers that meant the soil was waking up in a way that could not be rushed and could not be faked and could not be bought with a bag of synthetic fertilizer and a prayer. Harmon watched her write the count in the journal. He did not say anything. He did not need to. In 1991, her wheat came in at 26 bushels per acre. County average that year was 22. She had crossed the line. She did not celebrate. She wrote the number in the journal. Noted the rainfall, noted the soil temperature at planting, noted which sections had performed strongest and which still needed work. Then she went back to the Allsups for the night shift and worked until 7 in the morning and drove home with the sun coming up flat and orange across the panhandle and thought about what her mother had written in 1979. I am not farming a season. I am farming a generation. She understood it now in her body in a way she had only understood it in her mind before. Understanding something in your body means you stop doubting it, even when nothing around you confirms it. It means you can stand in a room full of people who think you are wrong and feel no need to argue. Crawford Isles noticed the yield report. She knew because he drove past the farm twice the day after the elevator numbers came out in the county agricultural newsletter. Drove past once heading east, once heading west, slowing each time at her property line. Did not stop. Did not wave. Wren was on the tractor both times and did not look up. The man who changed everything arrived in a Range Rover on a Tuesday afternoon in September of 1993, years before Wren understood what he had actually come to take. His name was Marcus Doyle. 31 years old, dark hair cut close, a button-down shirt that had never been near a farm supply store. He had an MBA from the University of Texas at Austin and a presentation folder under his arm, and the specific confidence of a man who had been told he was exceptional for so long that he had stopped examining whether it was true. He represented a company called Harwell Agronomics based in Dallas. Wren had not heard of them. She would spend the next 17 years wishing she had been able to say the same thing. Doyle shook her hand with the practiced firmness of someone who had taken a course on handshakes and asked if she had a few minutes. He set the presentation folder on the hood of her truck without asking permission and opened it to a page of charts. Harwell was offering what he called a full production partnership, proprietary seed varieties engineered for dryland yield optimization, a chemical input package, herbicides, fungicides, foliar treatments designed to work with the seed, application scheduling managed by Harwell's agronomists, yield guarantees in the contract. 40 bushels per acre, he said. Guaranteed. That is nearly double what this county is averaging right now. Wren looked at the charts. She looked at the seed variety names, all trademarked, all proprietary. She looked at the chemical input list. What is the rotation requirement, she asked. Doyle turned a page. The Harwell system runs best in continuous production, he said. Same crops, same inputs optimized for maximum output year over year. Wren looked at him. No fallow years, she said. The system does not require fallow years. That is one of its key advantages. You are not losing income to ground that is sitting empty. No cover crops. Cover crops are not necessary with the Harwell input program. The soil nutrition is managed through the chemical package. Wren closed the folder and pushed it back across the truck hood. I am not interested, she said. Doyle picked up the folder with the patient expression of a man who expected this answer as a first response and had prepared for it. He looked at her fields. He looked at the cover crop strips visible along the south border. He looked back at Wren with something that was almost respectful, but landed just short of it. You are doing something interesting out here, he said. I can see that. But interesting does not pay the bills. Our partner farms in the Texas Panhandle averaged 38 bushels last year. He paused to let that register. Whatever system you are running, it is not going to beat that. Not on dry land. Not at this scale. Wren looked at him for a long moment. "Come back in 10 years," she said. "We can compare notes." Doyle smiled. It was the smile of a man who was used to being underestimated by people who were about to learn better. He got back in the Range Rover and drove east toward Crawford Iles's operation. Iles signed with Harwell 6 weeks later. By 1992, 80% of the farms in Cimarron County had signed. Wren was one of 9 who had not. She watched the Harwell system take hold across the county, the way you watch weather come in from the west. Slowly at first, then all at once. New equipment showing up on neighboring properties, Harwell application trucks running the county roads every spring. The smell of the chemical packages on the wind when the conditions were right. The yield numbers in the county newsletter climbed. 31 bushels, 34, 36. Iles hit 39 in 1993, and the number went through the farming community like a current. People who had hesitated signed. People who had signed doubled their contract acreage. The county extension agent began using Harwell data in his presentations. Wren's 1993 yield was 28 bushels per acre. She was losing ground on paper. She knew it. Harmon knew it. Neither of them talked about it directly. What they talked about was soil structure, about the way the Harwell fields looked after 3 years of continuous production with no rotation and no organic matter inputs, about the way the soil was starting to crust on the surface after heavy rain events running off instead of absorbing, about the way the bare ground between crop rows was widening as the soil biological community declined and lost its ability to maintain structure. "Your mother called it mining," Harmon said one afternoon. They were standing at the fence line between Wren's south field and the edge of the Isles property. You can mine a field for years before the bill comes due. But the bill always comes. When Wren asked, he looked at the Isles ground. "Could not tell from here. Depends on how much they put in before your mother started building. Could be 5 years. Could be 8. He turned back to Wren's field. "Your ground will not have that problem," he said. In 1994, Doyle came back. Same Range Rover, same folder, different numbers. He was 35 now, had been promoted. Had a business card with a title that had 3 words in it. He stood in her driveway in the September heat and told her that Harwell's county average for partner farms was now 37 bushels and trending upward. "You are at 28, he said. It was not cruel, just factual in the way that facts can be used as weapons without technically being cruel. "You have been working this ground for 7 years. You are 9 bushels per acre below what our system is delivering." He looked at her fields, at the cover crops along the south border, at the rye stubble visible in the west section. "I respect what you are doing here. I mean that. But at some point you have to ask yourself who you are doing it for." Wren looked at him. "You are farming this ground like it is going to be here forever," he said. "Like the decisions you make now matter 30 years from now. That is admirable, but most people cannot afford admirable." She held his gaze. "I can," she said. Doyle closed his folder. He looked at her the way people look at someone they have decided to stop arguing with. Then he got back in the Range Rover and drove away, and Wren stood in her driveway and watched the dust settle behind him, and understood that the conversation was not over, only postponed. She did not know then what she would learn later, that in the same year, Marcus Doyle came back to her driveway with his updated numbers. Harwell's own internal agronomists had begun documenting something in their partner farms that Doyle was not mentioning in his presentations. She did not know yet, but the ground knew. The ground had been keeping records longer than any of them. The first sign came in the spring of 1997. Wren noticed it because she was paying attention to things other farmers were not paying attention to. She walked property lines. She looked at neighboring fields with the same careful observation her mother had practiced watching not just her own ground, but everything around it. Understanding that what happened on Iles's 1,100 acres would eventually affect what happened on her 280. The pigweed had always been there. Palmer amaranth, the most aggressive weed in the western wheat belt, capable of growing 3 inches in a day under good conditions, capable of producing 500,000 seeds per plant, capable of shading out an entire crop if it got ahead of you. Every farmer in the Panhandle knew it. Every farmer in the Panhandle managed it. What Wren noticed in 1997 was that the Harwell fields were not managing it. She noticed it first on the east edge of the Isles property, a section that ran along her fence line. The pigweed there was thicker than she had seen it in previous years, and more critically, it was there despite 2 herbicide applications she had watched the Harwell trucks make in March and again in May. The plants should have been dead. They were not dead. They were chest-high and setting seed. She walked her own south border and checked her cover crop strips. Nothing. The dense canopy of her legume rye mix along the fence line had left no room for pigweed to establish. No bare ground, no light penetration, no opportunity. She went home and looked in her mother's journal, found a note Vera had made in 1984, a small observation tucked into a field data entry. The rye canopy suppresses pigweed emergence by blocking early light. No chemical required. The cover competes, the weed loses. The chemical approach manages symptoms. My approach removes the condition that creates the symptom. Vera had understood this in 1984. Harwell's system was discovering the consequence in 1997. By the spring of 1998, the problem was visible from the county road. Wren drove past 3 Harwell partner farms on the way to the elevator in Boise City and saw the same thing at each one. Palmer amaranth standing above the wheat canopy in patches that ranged from a few square yards to full quarter sections. The plants had survived every herbicide application. They had not merely survived. They had selected for resistance generation by generation, season by season. Every application killing the vulnerable plants and leaving the resistant ones to reproduce until the resistant trait dominated the population. 7 years of continuous herbicide use on continuous production ground had done exactly what any first-year biology student could have predicted it would do. At the elevator that morning, the conversation among the farmers waiting to unload was not quiet. Wren stood in line with her truck and listened. Gerald Tipton, who farmed 600 acres north of town, said Harwell had told him the resistance was localized and they were developing a new product to address it. Dale Morrow, who farmed 800 acres east of Isles, said he had lost 40% of his northeast section to the weed and was not willing to wait for a new product. Isles was not there. Wren had not seen him in 3 weeks. She unloaded her wheat, collected her ticket, and drove back past the same 3 farms. She pulled over at the second one and looked for a long time at the pigweed standing thick and untouchable in a field that had been chemically managed for 7 consecutive years. Her own fields were clean. She drove home and called Harmon. He came over that afternoon and they walked her fence lines together, checking every section adjacent to a Harwell partner farm. What they found was what Wren had expected. Her cover crop borders were holding. The rye canopy was dense enough that even resistant pigweed could not get purchase. Wherever her ground ran up against open soil on the neighboring properties, the weed pressure ended at her fence line like a wall. "You are going to have a clean yield this year," Harmon said. She already knew that. What she was thinking about was not this year. "What happens to their ground?" she asked. Harmon looked at the Isles fields to the east, at the pigweed standing tall and seeding in the warm June wind. His expression was not satisfied. It was the expression of a man who had seen something like this before and had not enjoyed watching it then either. They are going to lose yield, he said. Bad. They will try to manage it with stronger chemistry, and that will speed up the resistance cycle. He paused. Some of these operations are going to be in real trouble by next season. The ones that are already thin on margin, they will not survive a bad year on top of this. He turned back to Wren's ground. Your mother built a buffer into this system that she probably did not even know she was building, he said. She was thinking about soil nutrition. She was not thinking about weed resistance. But the same practice that feeds your soil also controls your weed pressure. It is all one thing. Wren nodded. She had been thinking the same thing for 3 days. She thought about Marcus Doyle, about interesting does not pay the bills, about who you are doing this for. She thought about her mother walking this same fence line in 1984, writing a small observation into a journal that no one outside this farm had ever read, not knowing that 13 years later, the observation would be the difference between a clean harvest and a field full of resistant weeds. Vera had not known. She had just been watching carefully and writing down what she saw. That was the whole method. That was all of it. Wren's 1998 wheat came in at 31 bushels per acre. The county average that year was 14. She did not tell anyone what her numbers were. She drove to the elevator unloaded, got her ticket, drove home. That evening she wrote the number in the journal, noted the rainfall, noted the cover crop performance in each section, noted the absence of pigweed pressure throughout. Then she made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and looked at the wall for a long time. 31 bushels, county average 14. A difference that should not have been possible on dryland acreage with no irrigation, no GMO varieties, no Harwell chemical package. She thought about Denton Farr, about the chair too soft for the conversation she needed to have, about the framed boat photo and the watch that cost more than her truck. She thought about Crawford Isles driving past her fields for 10 years, slowing down, not stopping, waiting for the moment when her margin ran out and she had to sell. She thought about Marcus Doyle and his presentation folder, and his guarantee of 40 bushels per acre. She let herself feel it for exactly as long as it took to drink 1 cup of coffee. Then she washed the cup, put it away, and went to check the moisture on the west field because that section needed attention before the next planting window. The full weight of what was happening to the Harwell farms landed on Cimarron County in the winter of 1998 and did not lift. The yield losses had been bad. The financial losses were worse. Farms that had been carrying Harwell input costs against guaranteed yield projections were now facing the gap between what they had borrowed to produce and what they had actually harvested. Harwell's response was to offer a reformulated herbicide package at higher cost and to extend the contract terms of their most indebted partners. Wren heard about the contract extensions from the woman at the seed co-op, who heard about everything eventually. They cannot leave, the woman said. They signed extensions to cover the lost years. If they break the contract now, they owe Harwell the full projected value of the remaining term. She shook her head. Some of these boys are in there for another 4 years at minimum. Wren bought her seed and drove home. In March of 1999, a Harwell agronomist named Pryor came to her farm uninvited. He drove a company truck with the Harwell logo on the door, and he had a clipboard and a camera, and the professional courtesy of a man executing a task he found distasteful. He introduced himself, explained that Harwell was conducting a regional assessment of non-partner agricultural operations in the area, and asked if he could take some soil samples from her property boundary. Wren stood in her driveway and looked at him. Why, she asked. Regulatory compliance, he said. We are documenting the soil profile of the broader watershed to support our environmental impact reporting. Wren looked at the clipboard. She looked at the camera. "You do not have permission to take samples from my property," she said. Pryor nodded, adjusted his clipboard. He had expected this. He explained that Harwell had been in communication with the county agricultural office, and that under the county's soil health monitoring program, registered agricultural operations were subject to periodic assessment as a condition of operating within the county watershed district. He said it smoothly, the way things are said when they are designed to sound like facts. Wren went inside. She came back with a manila folder. Inside the folder was a document she had found 3 weeks earlier while organizing her mother's files. For the third time, a document she had initially set aside as irrelevant, a single page of legal text on county letterhead dated 1971. Signed by Vera Calloway and a county clerk whose name Wren did not recognize. She handed it to Pryor. He read it. His expression changed in the specific way that expressions change when a person realizes a conversation has gone differently than planned. The document was a registration under the Historical Dryland Farming Exemption Act of 1934, a provision created during the New Deal to protect small dryland operators who use traditional farming methods from regulatory requirements designed for large commercial operations. The exemption covered soil sampling, chemical input mandates, and third-party access for assessment purposes. It had been enacted to prevent corporate agricultural interests from using regulatory mechanisms to pressure small farmers into compliance with commercial systems. Vera Calloway had registered the Calloway farm under that exemption in 1971, when she first began her cover crop program, because the county extension agent at the time had told her that her unorthodox methods might eventually attract regulatory scrutiny. The exemption had never been entered into the county's electronic database when the records were digitized in 1993. It existed only on paper in the original filing cabinet at the county clerk's office and in Vera Calloway's manila folder, which was now in Wren's hand. Pryor read the document twice. He wrote something on his clipboard. He took a photograph of the document with Wren's permission, which she gave. He said he would need to consult with Harwell's legal team. He drove away. Wren stood in her driveway until the truck was out of sight. Then she went inside and called Harmon. He arrived 20 minutes later. She showed him the document. He read it and set it on the kitchen table and looked at it for a long time. "Your mother filed this in 1971, he said. Wren nodded. She knew, he said. Not about Harwell specifically. She could not have known that. But she knew something like this might come eventually. She knew that if she was going to farm differently from everyone around her, she needed to protect the right to do it. He looked up at Wren. She thought of everything he said. She thought of everything, and she did not tell anyone because the value of a document like this is that your opponent does not know it exists until the moment you need it. Wren looked at the single page on the kitchen table, a document her mother had filed 28 years ago, before Wren was born, as a precaution against a threat that had not yet materialized. 2 weeks later, Harwell sent a letter stating that the Calloway farm was exempt from the regional assessment program and that no further contact would be made regarding soil sampling. Marcus Doyle did not sign the letter. Someone from the legal department did. Wren filed it in the manila folder with her mother's registration and put it back in the drawer. The crisis deepened through 2001 and into 2002 in the way that slow disasters deepen each season a little worse than the last. Each year's losses a little harder to absorb. The reformulated herbicide package Harwell had offered in 1999 produced modest improvement in the first year, and then failed entirely as the resistant pigweed population adapted again. By 2001, the resistance was documented in 12 Oklahoma counties and 4 counties in southwest Kansas. A university extension report that circulated through the farming community that fall used words like systemic failure and irreversible trajectory. Crawford Isles lost 400 acres of productive capacity in 2001. His yield on the remaining ground was 19 bushels per acre, half what Harwell had guaranteed him when he signed in 1990. His contract had been extended twice. He owed Harwell for input costs and for 2 extension penalties. Wren heard about it the way she heard about everything indirectly, through the woman at the seed co-op, through the conversation at the elevator, through the particular silence that fell over certain topics in a small farming community when the losses became too real to discuss casually. In July of 2001, the fuel pump on the main tractor failed again. Different failure than the first time. The housing itself had cracked a repair that required a replacement part that had to be ordered from a dealer in Amarillo. The part cost $3,800. Wren had $900 in her account. She sat at the kitchen table that night with the bank statement in front of her and did the arithmetic she had been avoiding. The arithmetic was simple and merciless. She was $2,900 short of a repair she could not delay because the tractor was the only machine capable of running the fall cover crop seeding, which had to go in within 3 weeks or the window would close and the entire rotation would be disrupted. She could ask Harmon. She knew he would help if he had it. But Harmon was 67 years old on a fixed income, and she was not going to put that on him. She sat at the table for a long time. The window above the sink was dark. The fields were invisible. The cover crop strips her mother had started in 1971 were out there in the dark, holding structure-building organic material, doing the slow and patient work that no one could see from the road. She thought about selling, not the whole farm, just the west section, 80 acres. The section that had the lowest organic matter count and would take the most time to bring up to the level of the rest. 80 acres at current land prices would cover the repair and leave enough margin to get through the fall. She got up, found the legal pad she had been keeping notes in since 1987, and wrote the numbers, looked at them, looked at the window. She thought about the last page of her mother's letter. Do not sell. The ground remembers everything I put into it. She put the legal pad away. In the morning, she drove to Meridian Agribank in Tulsa. Denton Farr was 66 years old and planning his retirement. His office had the same frame boat photo, a different boat. His hair had gone from silver to white. When Wren walked in, he recognized her immediately, which she had not expected. You still have that farm, he said. She sat down and put the folder on his desk. Read this before you say anything, she said. He opened it. Inside were her yield reports for every year from 1988 to 2000. 14 years of data. She had organized it herself, a single-page summary at the front showing her yield county average and variance. The numbers told a story that no banker could misread. 1998, her year against county average, was on line 11. Her number was 31. The county average was 14. Farr read through the summary page, turned to the individual year reports, read through several of them, set the folder down. He looked at her differently than he had in 1987. Not like a child, not like a problem that had solved itself. Like someone who had done something he did not fully understand, but could not dismiss. The herbicide resistance issue, he said. Your ground is not affected. No. How long have you been running this rotation? She has been running it since 1971, Wren said. My mother started it. I continued it. Farr looked at the folder again. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, How much do you need? $3,000, she said. The repair will cost $3,800. I have $900. He was quiet for another moment. Then he pulled out a form and began writing. He approved $3,000 no collateral repayable over 18 months at bank prime rate. He pushed the form across the desk for her signature. "This is not charity," he said. "This is the best loan application I have seen in 5 years." He paused. "I told you in 1987 that land was not producing." He looked at the folder. "I was wrong about that." Wren signed the form. She drove back to Boise City and called the dealer in Amarillo and ordered the housing. It arrived in 4 days. She and Harmon installed it over 2 afternoons in the equipment shed, working in the specific companionable quiet of 2 people who have done this kind of work together, long enough that words are not necessary. The tractor started on the first turn. She ran it across the south field to check the hydraulics, feeling the familiar vibration through the seat, and the steering wheel listening to the engine. Note watching the cover crop residue fold under the tires. The fall seeding went in on schedule. The rotation held. She paid back the loan in 11 months. There are certain kinds of quiet that are not peaceful. The quiet that settled over Cimarron County between 2002 and 2005 was that kind. It was the quiet of people who had stopped arguing because the argument was over, and they had lost. It moved through the farming community like something had been taken out of the air, some expectation or confidence that had been present so long. Nobody noticed it until it was gone. Wren noticed. She drove the county roads and noticed. The Harwell application trucks stopped running in 2003. The company had quietly suspended new contracts in western Oklahoma the previous fall, citing market conditions in their quarterly report, which none of the farmers who had signed with them in the early 90s had ever read. The existing contracts remained binding. The partners who had extended their terms to cover lost years were still bound. They just were not getting the agronomic support they had been promised, because Harwell had redirected its field staff to newer markets in the Texas Panhandle and eastern Colorado, where the resistance problem had not yet fully materialized. Wren learned this from the county extension agent, who had spent 3 years recommending the Harwell system, and was now spending his mornings fielding phone calls from farmers who wanted to know what they were supposed to do next. She did not tell him she had warned anyone. She had not warned anyone. That was not the point. The point was what came after. In 2004, the EPA opened a preliminary investigation into Harwell agronomics, based on a complaint filed jointly by agricultural extension offices in 3 states. The complaint alleged that Harwell had possessed internal data as early as 2001, showing accelerated resistance development in its core herbicide package, and had not disclosed this data to contract partners or regulatory agencies. Marcus Doyle's name appeared in the complaint documents, not as a subject of the investigation, as a signatory on internal memos dated 2001 and 2002 that discussed the resistance data and the company's decision regarding its disclosure. Wren read about the investigation in the Boise City paper on a Thursday morning in February. She read the article twice. She folded the paper, set it on the kitchen table, and looked at it for a long time. She did not feel what she expected to feel. She had expected something like satisfaction. What she felt instead was closer to grief, a low and heavy recognition that the outcome she was looking at had been preventable and had not been prevented, and that the people who would pay the highest price for it were not Marcus Doyle or any Harwell executive, but the families who had farmed this county for 3 and 4 generations and were now looking at the end of something that could not be rebuilt. She thought about her mother, about what Vera had written in the journal in 1979. "I am not afraid of being called foolish. I am only afraid I will not live to see it finished." Vera had not lived to see it finished, but she had built the thing that made it possible, and Wren had kept it going for 17 years without knowing exactly what she was keeping it going toward. Now she was starting to understand. The letter from the Oklahoma State University Department of Soil Science arrived in June of 2005. It was addressed to the Callaway agricultural property and signed by a researcher named Dr. Nora Weston, whose title was listed as Assistant Professor of Dryland Soil Systems. The letter explained that Dr. Weston's research team had been analyzing yield data from Cimarron County as part of a broader study on soil health and agricultural resilience in the southern Great Plains. The Callaway Farm's yield records had been flagged as a significant statistical outlier, specifically the farm's performance during the 1998 drought year and the subsequent years of county-wide yield decline. The team was requesting permission to conduct soil sampling and requested a meeting at the farm's convenience. Wren read the letter 3 times. Then she called Harmon. He came over that evening and read it himself. "What do you think?" Wren asked. He set the letter on the table. "Your mother would have wanted someone to see it," he said. "She kept those records for 16 years and nobody outside this farm ever knew they existed." He paused. "Maybe it is time." Wren called the number on the letterhead the following morning. Dr. Nora Weston arrived in early August in a university truck with 2 graduate students and more equipment than Wren had seen outside a commercial operation. She was 32 years old, direct in the way that people who have spent their careers in laboratories are direct, efficient with words, unhurried with observation. She walked Wren's fields with the same careful attention Harmon had shown in 1987. Crouching to look at soil profiles, checking root depth in cover crop residue, running her fingers through the material at different depths with an expression of concentrated interest that Wren recognized. It was the same expression her mother wore in the field. They spent the first day walking every section of the farm. Dr. Weston asked questions that were specific enough to confirm she had read the yield data carefully before arriving. She asked about seeding rates and timing, about the sequence of cover crop species across different sections, about how Wren had adapted the rotation from what was documented in the earliest field records. On the second day after the soil cores had been collected and the initial laboratory analysis had come back from the University Extension Lab in Stillwater, Dr. Weston sat down at Wren's kitchen table with a folder of numbers and a look on her face that Wren could not immediately read. "I want to show you what we found," she said. She opened the folder and turned it so Wren could see. Organic matter content, main production fields 4.1%. She tapped the number. The Oklahoma Panhandle regional average is 0.9%. Your ground is running 4.5 times the regional organic matter baseline. Wren looked at the number. Topsoil depth, she continued. Your deepest core on the south field measured 9.2 inches. Regional average for dryland acreage in this county is 2.8. You have built more than 6 inches of functional topsoil since 1971. She turned another page. Water retention capacity is nearly triple what soil of this texture class would normally hold. That is why your 1998 numbers look the way they do. During the drought year, your ground was holding moisture at depth that neighboring operations could not access because their topsoil profile was too thin and their organic matter too low to bind and retain it. She closed the folder. Wren looked at her. She was thinking about a figure in her mother's journal, a note from 1971. Organic matter estimated below 1.2% by feel and drainage. Her mother had started at 1.2%. It was now 4.1. 34 years of work of cover crops and rotations and fallow cycles and careful observation had tripled the organic matter content of this ground. "I want to ask you something," Dr. Weston said. She was looking at Wren steadily. "How did you know to do this?" Wren got up, went to the cabinet above the refrigerator, and came back with the journal. She set it on the table between them. My mother started this in 1971, she said. She kept records for 16 years before she died. I found this after she passed. I continued the system she built. Dr. Weston opened the journal with the care of someone handling something irreplaceable. She read the first entry, read the next three, turned to the observations section in the back. The kitchen was quiet except for the turning of pages. After a long time, Dr. Weston looked up. Your mother had no formal training in soil science. She had a high school education and a library card, Wren said. Dr. Weston looked back at the journal. She was quiet for another moment. What she documented here, she said, the cover crop, sequencing the organic matter building cycle, the relationship between soil biology and water retention. We have peer-reviewed literature on all of this now. Good literature, some of it published in the last 10 years. She paused. Your mother was observing and documenting these same principles in 1974. She developed this methodology through direct observation, without access to any of the research that would later confirm what she was doing. Wren did not say anything. This journal, Dr. Weston said, is a primary source document for the history of regenerative dryland farming practice in the southern Great Plains. It should be preserved. And with your permission, I would like to include your farm's yield data and soil analysis in our research publication. You can use the data, Wren said. The journal stays here. Dr. Weston nodded immediately. Of course. She came back twice more that fall once, with additional sampling equipment, and once with a colleague from the agronomy department who wanted to see the South Field's root structure in person. On her last visit, she stayed for dinner, which Wren had not planned, but which happened because the conversation was still going at 6 o'clock, and neither of them had noticed. They talked about the journal, about Vera's observation method, the way she had built her understanding incrementally, season by season, never extrapolating beyond what the data actually showed. About the specific insight in the 1984 entry on cover crop canopy and weed suppression, which Dr. Weston said was, in her professional opinion, the single most practically important observation in the entire document, because it had documented the mechanism of biological weed control in dryland systems 15 years before the research community had a framework to describe it. Your mother was not just farming, Dr. Weston said. She was conducting a longitudinal field experiment. She just did not know to call it that. She knew what she was doing, Wren said. She called it farming. She thought that was enough. Dr. Weston looked at the journal on the table between them. She was right, she said. The class action lawsuit against Harwell Agronomics was filed in federal court in Oklahoma City in March of 2006. 37 plaintiffs, all contract farmers from Oklahoma, Kansas, and the Texas Panhandle. The claim was straightforward. Harwell had possessed and suppressed internal data showing that its herbicide resistance was accelerating, had extended contracts with existing partners without disclosing this data, and had collected fees for agronomic services it knew were failing. The damages sought were substantial. The attorneys for the plaintiffs were looking for evidence that Harwell's management had known and chosen not to act. The internal memos that Marcus Doyle had signed in 2001 and 2002 were central to the case. Wren received a call from one of the plaintiff attorneys in April. He explained that her farm's yield records and soil data had been reviewed by the research team at Oklahoma State and that Dr. Weston had provided a declaration to the court regarding the Callaway Farms' performance relative to Harwell Partner Farms during the same period. He said that the attorneys believed Wren could provide material testimony as a fact witness specifically regarding her direct interactions with Marcus Doyle and her observation of conditions on neighboring Harwell Partner Farms during the years in question. He asked if she would be willing to testify. Wren sat at the kitchen table with the phone in her hand. She thought about the September afternoon in 1990 when Doyle had put his presentation folder on her truck hood without asking. About interesting does not pay the bills. About the way he had looked at her cover crop strips with something almost like respect that landed just short of it. She thought about Dale Morrow and Gerald Tipton at the elevator in 1998, talking about the resistant pigweed in voices that were not quite steady. She thought about Crawford Isles driving past her fields at dusk year after year waiting. "I will testify," she said. The deposition was taken in a conference room in Oklahoma City in June of 2006. Wren sat across a long table from two attorneys representing Harwell and answered questions for 4 hours. She described her interactions with Doyle. She described what she had observed on neighboring farms beginning in 1997. She described the 1998 yield differential between her operation and the county average. She described her mother's cover crop system and the specific practices that had resulted in the clean yield that year. Harwell's attorneys challenged the yield data, questioned her methodology, and suggested that her farm's performance was attributable to favorable microclimate conditions rather than management practices. Dr. Weston's declaration addressed all of those challenges with soil core data, water retention measurements, and organic matter analysis going back to the baseline samples taken in 2005. The methodology was not in question. The results were not in question. The data was 34 years deep and documented in a leather journal that had been sitting in a military surplus box in a shed in Cimarron County since before Marcus Doyle had graduated from high school. The deposition ended at 4 in the afternoon. Wren drove back to Boise City in time to check the moisture on the west field before dark. She did not hear about the outcome until the following spring. The settlement was announced in February of 2007. Harwell Agronomics agreed to pay $41 million to the 37 plaintiffs, an average of just over $1 million per farming operation, adjusted for acreage and documented losses. The company simultaneously filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy reorganization. Marcus Doyle had left the company in 2005 before the EPA investigation became public. The settlement terms included a finding that the company had acted with knowledge of the resistance data and had suppressed disclosure. The finding was civil, not criminal, but it was a finding of record. Wren read about it in the same Boise City paper where she had first read about the EPA investigation 3 years earlier. She read it at the kitchen table with her coffee on a Thursday morning in late February, with the fields visible through the window under low winter light. Crawford Isles was one of the 37 plaintiffs. His settlement was one of the larger ones based on 1,100 acres of documented losses over 14 years. The money came too late to save his operation. He had lost 800 acres in a foreclosure proceeding the previous fall, when the bank called the notes he had been servicing at partial payment for 3 consecutive years. The remaining 300 acres went to auction in March. Wren drove to the auction and stood in the back of the crowd and watched the bidding. The land was adjacent to her property on the east and north borders. It had been heavily treated with Harwell inputs for 14 years, and the soil profile was degraded in ways that would take years to correct. Nobody wanted it. The opening bid came in at $42 per acre. Wren raised her hand at $67. Nobody bid against her. 300 acres of damaged ground for $20,100. She paid cash from the account she had been building since 1991. She drove home and walked the new section that afternoon, moving through it, slowly crouching every few yards to pick up soil and let it fall through her fingers. The ground was pale and thin, crust-surfaced from years of bare fallow and chemical treatment. Very few earthworms, almost no biological structure. The water retention would be poor, and the organic matter would test near zero. She had seen this before. She had seen it in her mother's first field notes from 1971. describing the ground her mother had inherited from the previous generation, soil mined down to nothing by 30 years of the same rotation. Vera Calloway had taken soil like this and built it into something that had outlasted every competing operation in the county. Wren stood in the middle of Crawford Iles's former land, with the March wind moving across the bare ground around her, and understood exactly what the next 15 years of her life were going to look like. She did not feel burdened by it. She felt for the first time since she had stood in her driveway at 20 years old and said out loud to no one that she was not selling, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Crawford Iles found her at the elevator 2 weeks after the auction. He was 71 years old now. The red-faced certainty she remembered from 1987, completely gone, replaced by something quieter and more permanent. He looked like a man who had finished arguing with himself about something and was living in the resolution. He stood by her truck and waited until she finished with the elevator paperwork. Then he said, "I heard you bought the 300. She nodded. He looked at the ground for a moment. Then he looked at her. "I drove past your place for 15 years thinking you were going to fail," he said. "I was not rooting against you. I want you to know that. I just could not see how it was going to work." Wren looked at him. "I should have asked you what you were doing instead of waiting for you to quit," he said. He paused. "I wish I had asked." She thought about what to say. She thought about her mother, about the neighbors who had driven past and shaken their heads at the cover crops and the fallow sections and the unorthodox rotation. About the years when asking would not have helped, because the answers were still being worked out season by season in a journal that nobody knew existed. "You would not have understood it in 1990, she said. "I barely understood it in 1990. It takes time to make sense." He nodded. He stood there for another moment, and then he said, "Take care of that ground." He looked toward the east, toward the land that had been his family's for 2 generations and was now hers. It was good land before. It can be good again. She said, "I know." He got in his truck and drove away. She watched him go and thought about her mother's letter. "Do not sell. The ground remembers everything I put into it." The ground remembered. And now she had more ground to give it back to. Harmon Voss came to the farm in October of 2007, looking thinner than the last time she had seen him. He was 73 years old, and he moved more carefully now, the way people move when they have been told by a doctor to be careful, with the deliberateness of someone conserving something. He walked the south field with her in the October light, the cover crop coming in thick and green across the section that had been her mother's original experimental ground, the section where Vera had first seeded winter rye in 1971 and recorded 4 earthworms per cubic foot in a journal she had locked in a military surplus box and left for her daughter to find. They did not talk much. They walked and looked at the ground, the way they had walked and looked at it together for 20 years, with the easy attention of 2 people who understood what they were looking at and did not need to explain it to each other. At the end of the south field, where the fence line ran along the boundary with the new section, Harmon stopped and stood for a while. "Your mother would have liked to see this," he said. Wren looked at the cover crop running across both sections, the old ground and the new ground together, the thick green of the rye moving in the October wind. "She built it," Wren said. "I just kept going." Harmon shook his head. "That is not a small thing," he said. He looked at her. "Keeping going is not a small thing. Most people do not." They walked back to the house, and Wren made coffee, and they sat at the kitchen table the way they had sat at it 100 times over 2 decades, with the journal on the table between them and the fields visible through the window. Harmon asked to look at the journal. She gave it to him. He turned through the pages, slowly looking at Vera's entries at the field diagrams and the yield data and the observation notes, and then at Wren's entries from the years after 1987. 20 years of continued documentation in her own handwriting following from where her mother had stopped. He set it on the table. That is 47 years of one farm's knowledge, he said. Nobody else in this county has anything like that. Wren looked at the journal. I have been thinking about what to do with it, she said. He looked at her. Not sell it or give it away, she said. Just how to make sure it keeps going. How to make sure someone carries it forward the same way I carried it forward from my mother. Harmon was quiet for a moment. You do not have children, he said. It was a statement, not a question. No. He nodded slowly. Then you need to find someone who understands what it is. Someone who will treat it like what it is, which is not a farming manual. It is a way of thinking about land. He paused. Dr. Weston understands what it is. Wren thought about the evening the previous fall, when she and Nora Weston had sat at this same table talking about Vera's observation method, until neither of them had noticed the time. About the way Nora had looked at the 1984 canopy entry, not with the excitement of a researcher finding data, but with the recognition of someone encountering an idea that matched something they had always believed to be true. She had thought about that conversation many times since. She called Nora the following week, not about the research publication, which was nearly complete, about something else. They met for coffee in Stillwater and talked for 3 hours. Wren brought the journal. She told Nora about Harmon's observation, about the question of continuity, about what it meant to carry something forward when the person who started it was gone, and the person who continued it was getting older. Nora listened. She was 34 now and had been promoted to associate professor and was running a dryland soil systems lab that was beginning to attract attention beyond Oklahoma. She had the patience for a long conversation. That good researchers develop the ability to follow an idea without hurrying it. What I'm asking, Wren said, is whether you would be willing to be part of keeping this going, not taking it over, not institutionalizing it, just being someone who understands it and will help make sure it does not disappear. Nora looked at the journal on the table between them. Your mother built a system and documented it, she said. You continued the system and extended the documentation. What you are describing is a third generation of the same work. Yes, Wren said. Nora picked up the journal, held it with both hands the way she had held it the first time she saw it. She looked at the cover for a moment. I will make you a commitment, she said. Not just as a researcher interested in the data, as someone who understands what your mother was doing and why it mattered. She looked at Wren. I will keep coming back. I will keep working this ground with you. And when the time comes, I will help you figure out what the next chapter looks like. Wren looked at her for a moment. My mother never got to see it finished, she said. Nora nodded. I used to think that was the sad part of her story, Wren said. I do not think that anymore. I think she understood that she was not supposed to see it finished. She was supposed to start it. She looked at the journal in Nora's hands. Starting it was the whole point. Denton Farr retired from Meridian Agribank in 2006. She heard about it from the woman at the seed co-op, who heard about everything eventually. He showed up at the farm on a Wednesday afternoon in April of 2008, unannounced, driving a personal car, not a bank vehicle. He was 73 years old and had lost weight, and moved with the deliberateness of a man who had recently been reminded of his own limits. He stood in her driveway and looked at the fields, looked at the new section to the east. The cover crop establishing across the former aisles ground the pale crust of the Harwell years already beginning to break down under 3 seasons of biological activity and organic input. Then he looked at the original sections, the south field and the west field, the ground her mother had started building in 1971, the ground that had tested at 4.1% organic matter and 9.2 inches of topsoil depth. He stood there for a long time without saying anything. Wren waited. He turned to her. "I told you in 1987 that this land was not producing," he said, "that the soil was dead and the operation was not viable." He paused. "I've been thinking about that conversation for a while now, since I left the bank and had time to think about things I said to people over the years." Wren looked at him. "I was wrong," he said. "Not just about the numbers, about the whole frame. I was measuring the wrong things and telling people who knew better that they were making mistakes." He looked at the south field. "Your mother knew better. You knew better. And I came in here with my yield averages and my soil test files and told a 20-year-old girl that her dead mother's farm was not worth saving." He stopped. "I have wanted to say that for a long time," he said. Wren considered him. She thought about the chair too soft for the conversation she needed to have, about walking out into the March wind at 20 years old, with her mother's jacket on and a drive home she would never forget. She thought about what he had done in 2001 when he had read her yield folder and approved $3,000 on the strength of 14 years of data, and said it was the best loan application he had seen in 5 years. "You were wrong in 1987, she said. "And then you were right in 2001. She paused. "People can be both." Farr looked at her. Something in his face shifted. "My son is looking at land in this county," he said. "He farms in the Texas Panhandle and he wants to expand into Oklahoma. He asked me if I knew anyone around here worth talking to." He paused. I told him I knew exactly one person. Wren looked at him for a moment. "Send him by," she said. "I will show him what I have built." Farr nodded. He looked at the fields once more, at both sections together. Old ground and new ground. The original 280 acres and the 300 acres she was bringing back from the Harwell years. 580 acres, he said. He shook his head slowly. "From a broken tractor and $61. She looked at her land. All of it in the April light. The cover crops green and dense, the soil underneath doing what her mother had known it could do if someone had the patience to let it. Not from those things, she said. From the journal. From 16 years my mother spent building something she would not live to see finished." Farr stood with her for another minute in the kind of quiet that doesn't need to be filled. Then he got in his car and drove back toward the county road, and Wren watched his taillights until the road curved and he was gone. She turned and walked to the south field, crouched down at the edge of the cover crop, and picked up a handful of soil and held it in her palm, feeling the weight of it, the texture, the dark cohesion that 37 years of patient building had made possible. She thought about her mother crouching in this same spot in 1971, with soil that was gray and light, and nearly empty of life, writing in a journal that no one would read for 16 years. Organic matter estimated below 1.2%. No earthworm count possible. She let the soil fall back to the ground. She opened the journal to the page after her last entry, put her pen to the line. She wrote the date. She wrote the soil temperature and the cover crop emergence rate in the new section. She wrote an observation about the eastern fence line where the biological activity was beginning to show in the changed color and texture of the surface layer. The first visible sign that the ground was starting to remember what it was supposed to be. Then she wrote in the space her mother had left blank at the back of the observation section, in the same neat handwriting she had been practicing since she first opened the box in the shed 21 years ago. She was right about everything. The ground remembered. It is still remembering. I intend to keep writing until someone else is ready to carry this forward. And after that, I intend to trust that they will do what she trusted me to do, which is to stay, and to pay attention, and to give back more than you take. The wind moved across the panhandle, the way it always had, flat and wide and indifferent to the particulars of what happened beneath it. Wren Calloway was 38 years old, and she was not finished. The ground was not finished either. Neither of them had any intention of stopping.